Dave Tosch, Executive Director, Wenatchee Valley Senior Activity Center, and today I'm with Doug Shadel. Doug is the Director for AARP Washington, and we're privileged to have him today. He's a busy guy running the AARP for the entire state, and we have just made contact with Doug recently and wanted to get this information out as soon as we can. So there's some pretty relevant and topical information that I think everyone watching is going to appreciate. Doug, tell us a little more about this program that's coming up, the Tipoffs to Ripoffs, I guess is what you're referring it to.
Right, Tipoffs to Ripoffs, and it is a statewide consumer campaign where we're going into communities like Wenatchee and trying to make people aware of the types of scams that are not just crossing the nation or the state, but the types of scams that are calling into Wenatchee. We have a partnership with this company called Nomo Robo, which is a call blocking company. You know, you get those annoying robo dials that say, you know, do you want an extended warranty or whatever? And Nomo Robo blocks those calls, but they also monitor almost 1 million phone lines and can tell us city by city the kinds of calls that are coming into a particular place. So when we come to Wenatchee, we'll be able to say, here are the top 5 scams that are going around in Wenatchee right now, not 3 months from now, but right now. And we're hoping that by presenting that kind of current real-time information about scams, that people will be more likely to avoid them.
So just the other day, I had one of the seniors approach me, and they're pretty astute with the technology in their phone, and they've been blocking calls when they know it's a scam, but they keep getting them. And so I know that this gets in a lot of technical stuff and it gets a little complicated, but for folks that are trying to block calls, you got any tips on that?
Well, it's possible to manually block calls. If a number comes through 1-800-555-1212, you could block that number. It's a little bit of a fruitless task, though, because as you suggested, you know, what these robodialers do is, you know, you can spend $100 and make 100,000 phone calls, and you're calling from a number that changes whenever you want it to change. So if you block that number, they're just going to create a new one. There are several companies out there like Nomo Robo, RoboKiller, Umail, where you can download software onto your phone and they will block the calls for you. I know the most about Nomo Robo. I'm sort of agnostic about which company to choose, but how do they do this? Well, Aaron Foss, who was just on with us this morning and who will be on with us when we come to Wenatchee, described it. He basically went and he bought 300,000 mothballed phone lines. This is about 5 or 6 years ago. And he runs all of those phone lines into a computer. They're still getting calls. They're still getting robocalls and everything else. And that's how he identifies a robocall. So when you put Nomo Robo on your phone and I call you, it checks my number against a huge database, a blacklist database, if you will, of numbers they've already identified. And if there's a match, it blocks it. And if there's not a match, it goes through. So one thing to consider is getting some kind of a call blocking service. You can go to your phone company and ask them for it. Some of these are free depending on who your service provider is.
So if people want to participate in this big event you're going to have, who are they going to be listening to? Who's going to be addressing them?
Yeah, well, the speakers, I'm going to be giving a presentation about the latest sort of one of the hottest scams that's out there right now, which is the so-called tech support scam. And we're doing this in a way we've never done before. About a year ago, I met a guy named Jim Browning. And Jim Browning is I don't know if you call him an internet vigilante, but he is a guy who kind of tries to identify these scammers. You know, the kind of scam I'm talking about is you're on your computer and a screen comes up and says, you've got a virus on your computer. Danger, danger, call this number. And then you call the number and you're talking to a boiler room in India or somewhere else around the world. And what they tell you is, that's right, I'm from Microsoft, even though they're not. But in order to find out what's really going on with your computer, you need to let me remote access into your computer, right? That's the scam. They get into your computer and all of a sudden you have to pay in order to take care of the problem. Well, Jim Browning, who is an IT expert, started getting these calls himself. And he said, okay, yeah, you can remote access into my virtual computer. He's created a virtual computer. And when they do that, he has figured out a way to reverse engineer his way into their computer, the scammer's computer. And he downloads software that allows him to videotape everything they're doing. And so we are going to be showing you basically the inside of the scammer's computer and everything they're doing. And we focus in on one particular transaction where this guy just manipulating this poor woman in Florida, retiree in Florida, and all the crazy things they say. So that's one presentation. Then we're going to have Aaron Foss, who is the head of Nomo Robo, come in and tell your audience, here are the threats coming into Wenatchee right now. We monitor all these phones and we know what calls are coming into every community. And here are the biggest threats in Wenatchee. And I can tell you, they do change. They're not always the same. You know, 1 minute it'll be some kind of Amazon scam, you know, somebody hacked into your Amazon account. Another time it could be a police charity that's a scam. One of the biggest ones right now, Russ, is Medicare free genetic testing for cancer. I don't know if you've gotten any of these calls or not, but Nomo Robo tells us that is the most common robocall going into almost every community in the United States. And what it basically is they'll tell you that Medicare has just created this new program where you can get a DNA test, a genetic test, to see if there's any kinds of problem with your genetic makeup that might lead to you getting cancer or anyone in your family. So it's immediately scaring you. You think, oh, I might have the gene for cancer, and then you don't have to pay for it or anything. Medicare tells us that, and some of our people have taken some of these calls or gotten them. And when you ask them, well, shouldn't I check with my doctor? Oh, no, don't check with your doctor. Your doctor doesn't know how to do this. You know, or my favorite one is when they said, well, because of COVID, you know, it's a mouth swab test. And so doctors can't do it. Only you can do it yourself, you know, that kind of thing. And it's just, those are examples of, you know, scammy things going on all over the country, including Wenatchee. And that's what we want to bring to you.
So who is the target audience for the special event? Do you have to be an AARP member? And, you know, how do people get signed up for it?
Yeah, you don't have to be an AARP member. It's going to be on June 30th, 10 to 11:30 a.m. And the way to sign up is just go to this webpage, aarp.org/Wenatchee Tipoffs. I'll give it to you again. That's aarp.org/Wenatchee Tipoffs. And anybody can register. The event's completely free. And I would encourage people to go sign up.
I think you've already hit on this a little bit, but I'll ask it. Maybe you can give a little more information. So who is really on the other end of this line, and why is it taking us so long to try and get them to stop?
Yeah. Well, we had a long conversation this morning with a group on that exact question with regard to robocalls. You know, part of it with robocalls is it's just so inexpensive to reach a large audience. You know, in any given year, only 10 to 15% of the population falls for some kind of scam or loses money to a scam. So it's always been kind of a numbers game. But if you can spend $100 and dial out 100,000 calls, even if you only get 4 or 5 people to, you know, send you $500 or $1,000 for virus protection that you don't really need, that's a living for people. And so you could be at a laptop. I mean, the case we profiled this morning, which we'll do in Wenatchee, is a guy's on a laptop just outside of Calcutta, India. He's using public Wi-Fi, and he's using that to scam people by basically saying, you know, either it's either a refund scam or this pop-up thing you're talking about. So it's a lot, and law enforcement will tell you that it's really like playing whack-a-mole. You know, the minute they take down somebody, 5 more people crop up because there's just not that many barriers to entry. All you really need is a laptop and the methodology for how to get pop-ups to pop up on people's screens or how to order robocalls, and you're in business. So we think that the best way to combat it is to get to folks before they do and teach them how this works so they won't fall for it.
You've already mentioned one example, but what are some of the more dangerous and popular robocalls right now?
Well, one of the ones that we see just everywhere, in addition to the Medicare one I mentioned and tech support, is sort of the fake Amazon call. You know, one of the consequences of the pandemic is that everybody's at home, and almost everybody at some point in the last year has ordered at least something from Amazon. So a call that you might normally reject because, you know, would sound like this. You just ordered an $800 iPhone Plus. If you didn't order it, if you did order it, then just ignore this call. But if you didn't order an iPhone Plus, please call this number right away. And normally you might reject a call like that, except that yesterday I did order something from Amazon. So I wonder if they got their lines, you know, maybe I should call to make sure. It's made legitimate by the fact that so many people are using that brand. And the scammers understand this. That's why they use big, credible brand names like Microsoft and Amazon to lure people in. And then once they get you on the phone, they'll want your information. They're either trying to get your, you know, bank account information so they can give you a refund or something like that, or remote access into your computer to give you a refund. You just want to stay away from that. If somebody calls you and says there's something wrong with an Amazon order, you just need to independently go onto the Amazon site and check it out and not respond to people who call.
So you said you'll be providing local data on some of the top calls targeting Wenatchee area consumers, which is pretty relevant to us. How are you finding that kind of information, and how will we be able to keep up to date on what to look out for?
Good question. The source of the data is our partnership with Nomo Robo, and as I mentioned, they're monitoring, you know, hundreds of thousands of phone lines, and some of those phone lines are mothballed phone lines from Eastern Washington, and specifically from the Wenatchee area. So they don't belong to anybody. They belong to Nomo Robo, and this is how they can tell us who's calling into your area. And just because you didn't receive a call doesn't mean those calls aren't coming into the area. So that's how they find out kind of what the threats are, and they do change over time. Just depending on what's going on in the news. Typically, if the, you know, and you folks probably already know this, but we're about to hit fire season, right, in Eastern Washington. You'll get all kinds of charities calling about supporting firefighters and that kind of thing. Yeah. And so we have, you know, a bunch of tips about that, and it'll be interesting to see by the end of this month whether that already is taking place, depending on what the fire season does.
So in my own particular situation, I've kept my area code 253 phone number because I didn't want to go through the hassle of getting it changed over to a 509. And I've had that now for about 15 years. And so most all my scam calls originate with a 253 area code. So is there anything to that? I mean, is that just typical the way it works? I know there's some, every once in a while I get one that's got an 800 number on it, but so do they tend to stay within the same area code? Does that make it a better process for them?
That's a very good question, and this is a point I'd like to always make. If you remember nothing else, caller ID no longer tells you who's calling. But, you know, it just does it because it's so easy to spoof the number. And there's this thing called neighbor spoofing, where the scammers know that if they just call from an 800 number to your home phone, you're going to look at that and go, oh, that's a salesman. So they change it to a 253 number that matches your area code. And sometimes they can match the area code and the prefix. Sometimes you'll get a call. This has happened to me. I get a call from my own number. How is that possible? And it's all designed to increase pickup rate. 25, 30% increase in pickup rate. Because if it's a local area code or local prefix, you assume it's somebody local who you can trust. And it's just not the case anymore, because they can do this, they can automate it and just go, look, have the call that shows up on caller ID match the area code. Press a few buttons and they're all like that. So you really can't tell anymore. I did a demonstration a couple years ago where we bought a spoofing app called Spoof Card. And we were on stage at a senior center, and I called my colleague and I pretended to be her granddaughter. That's right, you heard it right, her granddaughter. Because this app allows you to just enter the number you're calling. So I enter my colleague's number, and then it says, enter the number you want to appear on their caller ID when the phone rings. And so I just match, I match the number to the area code, so she'll pick up. And then there's another function on this app, and this app cost me $5, that allows my deep male voice to turn into a girl's voice. Just converts it. And so now all of a sudden I'm, a 15-year-old granddaughter, and really I'm, Doug Shadel, state director for me. It's just technology, for all the great things it's done for us, can be used in this way to exploit people. And we just need to raise people's awareness about the digital world we live in and what can happen if you're not careful.
Well, I don't want to make this all about me, but with regard to my 253 area code, at least up to now, it's helped me a lot, because anybody I want to hear from on the other side on a 253 area code, I have their name in my address book. So if it's some other 253 number, I just don't answer it, and because I know it's a scam.
Good. Yeah, that's good.
So that works for me. Before we finish up here, what are some tips? I know you've given some already, but some tips on how we can stop these robocalls.
One thing to consider is to get a call blocking service. I would say another tip is to, people ask me sometimes, should I get on the do not call list? There's the federal do not call list. You can, but that's not going to get you all the way. The scammers that we're talking about don't care about the do not call list. This is a federal number that lists that, legitimate telemarketers are supposed to check before they call you. But there's so many scammers out there now, they don't really check. I would say it's really just a question of being suspicious when people are calling out of the blue. If you don't know who they are, let it go to voicemail and screen your calls that way. The last thing you want to do, whether it's a computer pop-up or a robodial claiming to be from Microsoft or whatever, never let anybody remote access into your computer who you don't know. If you've initiated the contact, like let's say you think you have a problem with some Microsoft software, and you go online and you carefully select the help desk for Microsoft, that's one thing. But anybody who approaches you on email, text, and this is another thing we haven't really talked about, be careful of texting, because the call blocking is one thing, but people are getting more and more of these malicious texts where it'll say something, like there's something wrong with your account, click on this link to find out what, and it'll be from your bank. You got to be very careful not to click on those links, because that very will likely take you to what they call a phishing web page, a fake web page. And they'll have you, and they'll ask you, first thing I'll ask you to do is to enter your personal identifying information to verify what's wrong with your account, and the whole thing's just a phishing operation. So you got to be unfortunately careful about malicious texts, pop-ups, robocalls, emails. It just pays to be suspicious these days. I guess it's the best tip.
Well, Doug, I want to thank you so much for spending your time with us today. I think we're looking forward to finding out a whole lot more with some of the programs you're coming up with. Obviously, the special event on June 30th. And I think that it's going to be worthwhile for our seniors to tune in and watch these programs, because we're going to have a lot of this coming up in the near future. Thank you so much.